Hello and welcome to another great segment in our SQF Code Edition 9 webinar series. My name is Kathy and I'm the Marketing Specialist at SQFI and I'm glad you can tune in today. The topic we will be talking about in this session is on in-house labs in Edition 9. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Frank Schreurs, SQFI's Technical Representative based in Canada.
Great, thanks Kathy, and thanks for everybody for attending or picking up on this particular micro-learning that we have and that we've been doing in advance of our SQF Global event, and trying to pick up on the different types of things that might be noteworthy in the code that might be problematic. And as Kathy indicated, we are going to talk about in-house labs and a couple of the changes in Edition 9 with respect to that. So let's just dive into that. So I'm going to take a look at our in-house lab requirements because they have changed a little bit. That whole issue of lab staff proficiency testing that everybody seems to get some problems over as to who has to have it, how much do they have to have. So we'll provide a little bit more clarity on that. And also we'll talk about external labs and external lab requirements as they are in the code. Okay, so in terms of Edition 9, because it will be rolling that out at the SQF Global event, which I'll talk about at the end. We've done a lot of improved the architecture and structure of the codes to simplify it, reduce the number of requirements, which I think is helpful for sites in terms of implementing and maintaining the codes, and also for auditors in structuring that. Had to make some changes to it because of the GFSI requirements, and we had to address some of the codes in industry risk and emerging issues. So we've added all of that into the codes, and we've also combined some commonly used industry scopes, like we combined meat slaughter and meat processing, and we moved plant material, plant product packing houses in with primary production, things like that to help, especially with some of those vertically integrated types of operations. Some of the key changes is requirement for food safety culture, the in-house lab requirement, which we're going to talk about, some modifications to the quality code, and incorporated requirements for remote audit activities in light of the pandemic and the use of those activities, and updating the code to reflect how to use those types of things. So before we talk about the in-house lab requirements, I just want to define what is an in-house lab, because again, that can be somewhat problematic to some sites. So just a little bit of things of what in-house labs do and what they do not do. So what in-house lab typically does are microbiological chemical testing. So when you're using solvents and other types of lab materials, and you're in a structured lab, that's part of what an in-house lab does. They can do ingredient and process or finished product testing, either microbial or chemical. And you store and use chemicals not for use in a production area. So those types of lab chemicals that aren't used outside there, some of them like maybe pH buffers, and some of those not as stringent types of chemicals can be used in production areas, but typically the types of chemicals used in the lab are stronger and defined for use only in a lab. What in-house lab typically doesn't do is, and I want to differentiate that from say a product inspection type of setup that might be out in the process or out somewhere in the product handling area. So in-house labs typically don't do that. They might do it at the same time, but they're not designed to just do that type of product sampling and testing that would typically be done in the process. Organoleptic analysis by operators, or operators that are taking product off the line and kind of tasting it, looking at it, analyzing it. That type of analysis by the operators is typically not done in an in-house lab, but out in the process. And if you're looking at boiler, house, or water quality testing by the operators, that too is typically not done in the lab. So it kind of gives you the difference between a product sampling and inspection type of area in the operation versus an in-house lab. So we want to make sure that that's done and that is understood clearly by all, so that when you assigning a lab, then you can start looking at the requirements in the code specifically to an in-house lab. So what did we change in Edition 9? We merged some part of that restructuring was merging some things, so there was less requirements and putting them together where it made a lot of sense. So in terms of the lab, we merged a couple of sections of the code, and they're now all in one section called 2.4.4.2. So that's where you're going to get all your in-lab stuff together. So specifically, we talked about in-house labs being compliant to ISO 17025. We'll discuss what we mean by compliant in a little bit. Not that you have to be accredited to that. That's definitely what external labs do, not in-house labs. They don't have to necessarily. And we're going to talks about that proficiency testing on sampling, and we simplify the language within the code. So those are all things that we talked about, or will be talking about in Edition 9. So how will you be evaluated? Okay, so the auditor is going to look at your good lab practices. So you should have SOPs, standard operating procedures, we should have it for all analysis, but specific to the code, we're looking at those food safety tests that are critical or where you have defined within your food safety plan a control measure for something that you're measuring and testing. You will define that, your food safety plan will define that, and the auditor would audit you against that. You shouldn't be expected to have those detailed SOPs for everything and every procedure or every test that you do in that lab. Because you may be doing quality tests and maybe some process efficiency testing. Maybe you're doing some BODs or CODs for effluent that have nothing to do with the product. Those are all things that you could be doing in the lab. We're only be focusing in the code only focuses on those that are critical or important to food safety. So you need to define those and have SOPs for that. And you should need to have training for all personnel that are doing those SOPs. Other SOPs, that's up to you. But those that are critical or important to food safety need that training for personnel. Part of that training, both initial and then ongoing, is a proficiency test. And again, this is to improve the accuracy of the SOP, so you can develop an SOP, train somebody on it, and they can do it. How do you know that the outcome is consistent and that it complies with other labs, external labs that are doing it? So you want consistency. That's what a proficiency test is. So you would set that up again for those critical and important food safety items only. If you can do it for other ones, but you're only going to be evaluated against the code for those ones that you've defined, and you need to define how that proficiency occurs. Do you send a sample out and it's done there? Sometimes there's online things you can do. There's a number of different ways that a proficiency test can be done. You need to define that and find the best solution to ensure the accuracy of that test. That's ultimately what we're aiming for there. External labs are also mentioned in there. So when you use and have to use an external lab sometimes you have to use it for regulatory purposes, or you don't have the ability to do that, say for some micro testing that you want to send out for, say, Listeria monocytogenes or something very specific like that you can't do in-house. That particular external lab then has to be accredited to 17025. That is a lab accreditation. External lab needs to follow that. We use the term your internal lab needs to comply with 17025, but only for those applicable requirements that are important to the criticality of those particular tests. So again, back to your SOPs, how you do it, the type of calibration that you have to do for, say, some equipment that you're using, those sorts of things. So that's the difference between the in-house lab complying with 17025 and the external lab being accredited to 17025. Huge difference between the two. Be careful of that. Now, if you are doing some regulatory tests that require 17025 and you're doing it in-house, then your in-house lab would need to be accredited to 17025. That might be the case. Typically not. Sometimes there's corporate labs that can do that as well. So you also are required to meet any regulations that refer, and like as I said, refer back to whether the lab needs to be 17025. So make sure you're following the country requirements for that. Be aware the FDA, if you're in the US, the FDA is coming out with some new regulations. They're currently in comment and consultation phase, but I think the outcome of that will be, or what we perceived the outcome of that to be, is that they're going to be requiring external labs and any internal lab that does critical food safety and microbiological testing to be accredited to 17025. So you might want to keep an eye out for that. I think they're supposed to come out with the regulation and what we've heard sometime in the fall. So those are the things that you're going to be evaluated on with respect to the in-house labs. Concentrate on your SOPs. Define those particular food safety tests that you feel are critical or important. So obviously anything that's associated with a CCP, but any other control measure that through your food safety plan you might have deemed as significant. They aren't necessarily CCPs, they might be CPs or something else that you control. All your environmental testing that you're doing in-house to support your environmental monitoring program would definitely be those types of tests that are critical to food safety. Those are just some examples. There might be others, and it very much depends on what types of products and processes that you have in your particular operation. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of sense of what's coming down the pipeline with Edition 9 and how that relates to you. I just want to finish up with a couple of bits of information of where you can find more info and more detail on what we're doing. Our SQF Global event, SQF Global 2020, is happening in North America from August 27th to 30th. It is a virtual platform, but you want to take a look at getting registered for that. I think it's going to be very flexible to meeting your time needs. We're recording a lot of stuff. You can go back in and look at recorded events afterwards if you can't see all of them. We have some live events as well as recorded. We're going to talk about some of all the different types of code breakers, what we call code breakers, where there's live Q&A on the different changes to the code. And we have a very specific presentation on in-house lab testing that goes into more detail than what we've quickly presented here. Also, we've been shouting out in a number of different ways our new IM SQF global community. So if you've seen some of that and you want to send a recording to and be part of that initiative, please reach out and send that back to us. We'll be glad to receive it. You can also get some more training on our online platform via our Alchemy Academy. So that's available through our website. To look at some of all the events and training by our licensed training centers, also available. And then on the website, you can take a look at the SQF Global agenda and the sessions to see if it's of interest to you. So we look forward to seeing you or hearing you and getting you involved in SQF Global if you can. So there's some contact info for us. You can get to our website. You can also contact us at info@sqf.com. We've got a customer service team, or call us and we'll do that. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, on Twitter, where you can interact with us as well. So starting to engage with our SQF community that way. So many ways to get in touch with us and to find out more about Edition 9 and all the other things that we're going to be talking about at the SQF Global event. Thank you, and look forward to taking any questions that you might want to mail in or send in and about in-house testing.